Today, we will talk about the Catholic Church in a light that is certainly different from the divine one, decidedly darker. Stay with me, as in this video, we will explore all the misdeeds of the popes throughout the history of the Catholic Church, and the information uncovered by historical research, which would be nothing short of shocking even for the most hardened criminal. Hey guys! Welcome to Historical Gossip. In this channel, we do what humans have done best since we've evolved to be a super-aware being. Gossiping! Viewer discretion is advised. This is an educational documentary. Numerous popes have engaged in orgies, violence, murders, and much more, it must be said. However, that not all accusations directed at the pontiffs were true. Sometimes there were those with conflicting interests with the reigning pope, and they exaggerated his faults for personal purposes. However, the immoral conduct of some was continuous and evident to all, confirmed by historiography. The misdeeds of the popes were not only reported by anti-clerical sources such as the book Criminal History of Christianity, but also by important papal documents, the official memory of the bishops of Rome and other voices close to the church itself. Let's delve into the criminal records of these popes. This scandal involves Julius III, originally known as Giovanni del Monte. The cardinal was continuously accused of sodomy, not openly, as those who accused him risked consequences, but through anonymous messages known as pasquinades written on sheets and left at the feet or hung around the neck of some statues in Rome, called talking statues. Since the 16th century, Romans protected and afflicted criticisms and satirical compositions against important public figures. Julius confirmed these allegations when, just 4 months after his election as pope, he appointed the speculated lover Innocenzo del Monte as a cardinal. Did you notice that he has the same surname as the pope? This is because cunningly Julius had Innocenzo adopted by his brother Baldovino del Monte. It was much more convenient. He had become his nephew so he could stay close and grant him positions and favours, saving appearances. Nepotism was widespread and practically accepted, but an open homosexual relationship by the Pope was another story, especially if you grant your very young, poor and ignorant lover positions such as cardinal and the head of the entire government structure. But let's go back to Innocenzo's adoption, which is peculiar. The boy, before adoption, was not an orphan, but the son of a servant, and he had another name, Santino Dal Monte. He had met him when he was 13 and fell in love with him, exchanging him with the father's complicity for significant favours, as we have seen. Later, the boy also received lucrative ecclesiastical benefit. Although formerly Innocenzo was the Pope's nephew, few believed in the story of paternal, or should we say avuncular, love. Moreover, it seems that the Pope himself did not hide the concupiscent relationship with the boy, but even discussed it with the cardinals. The charges conferred on the young lover, therefore, caused scandal and amazement, not only among European courts, but also among the already corrupt Roman Curia. All was fine, but this was too much, even for them. The most horrifying thing is that in my research, I found no determination regarding the age of the boy, which apparently was not a problem at the time. Moreover, this daring move by Julius III had been predicted during the conclave by a pasquinade warning not to make Del Monte pope, because he has whims that would remove street urchins from the road and put them by the side of the Trinity. In the end, Innocenzo turned out to be one of the worst cardinals in the history of the Church. When Julius died, the boy was 23, and he began to accumulate one crime after another. He was involved in violence, a series of heterosexual rapes, and even murders. Finally, Pope Paul IV stripped him of the purple and imprisoned him in a castle, but with very lenient penalties. It surprised me to discover that despite the ecclesiastical scandal, Julius and Innocenzo were buried together in the chapel of the Monte Church of San Pietro in Montorio. Kill them all, God will know his own. This famous phrase was not uttered by a pope, but by a papal legate. Well, the Pope had sent a papal legate, Arnold, to exterminate the Cathars in what was called the Cathar or Albigensian Crusade, as many Cathars lived in Albi in southern France. The action was so violent that some historians considered it a true genocide. Before explaining what happened and the meaning of the famous phrase, let me give you a hint about why Pope Innocent III was so annoyed by the Cathars. This group had a different Christian view from that of the official church. They believed that the material world was the work of Satan, rejected the doctrine of the incarnation, sacraments, marriage, private property, and the church's authority to condemn and punish. Besides theological differences, there was also a threat to the power and structure of the church. The Cathars did not appreciate the scandalous and dissolute lifestyle of the majority of the clergy. They wanted a return to the original Christian message of perfection, poverty, and preaching, combined with a rejection of material possessions. In the 2nd century after Christ, the Cathars were condemned as heretics, and initially Pope Innocent III decided to address the issue diplomatically, but it was unsuccessful. The Cathars showed no respect for the authority of the French king or the local Catholic Church, and their representatives were protected by powerful nobles who had an interest in staying independent from the crown. In various diplomatic attempts, a papal legate was killed, and at that point, Innocent III had had enough. He decided to resort to strong measures and launched a real crusade. Until then, crusades had only been waged against Muslims and pagans. The Crusaders carried out extremely violent actions, often directed against civilians, as in the massacre of Béziers in 1209, under the command of Papal Legate Arno. The Crusaders began to besiege the city, asking Catholics to leave and the Cathars to surrender, but neither group complied. Before attacking, a soldier reportedly asked the legate how he could distinguish heretics from others during the action. He replied, "Kill them all, God will know his own." As a result, the entire population was massacred and the city was razed. The Crusaders killed every man, woman, elder, and child in the city. The news of the massacre spread quickly, leading other settlements to surrender without a fight. The Albigensian Crusade is considered by many historians as a genocide and was a prelude to the legitimate Inquisition, where heresy had to be punished for the spiritual well-being of the individual and the preservation of the Church. In less than 3 years of his papacy, Nicholas III managed to place various nephews and relatives in important positions, giving them significant responsibilities and opposing King Charles of Anjou, King of Naples and Sicily. In Nicholas III's plans was the creation of a large lordship in northern Italy, including Emilia-Romagna and Tuscany, governed by his family, the Orsini. Compared to other popes, Nicholas III might seem like a saint, but he earned his place in this list because it seems that the term nepotism originated from his action. The next character became pope 3 times. You probably didn't think it was possible, but in the Middle Ages there was great confusion in the church with a surplus of popes, sometimes 3 simultaneously, and someone becoming an anti-pope. In short, there were too many. Returning to this pope on the 3rd occasion, he became the first and only pope to have sold the office of pontiff. I'm talking about Pope Benedict IX, who not only resigned from the Petrine ministry, as others before him had already done, but also sold it to the presbyter John of Graziano for £2,000, who then became Pope Gregory VI. At this point, Benedict IX could be called the master of simony because, even though the buying and selling of ecclesiastical offices were already widespread, selling the papacy was another level. Pope Benedict IX is criticised by all his contemporaries, but according to the book Absolute Monarchs, his reputation may have been exaggerated. His upbringing was said to be corrupt, dissolute, and violent. It was rumoured that he was homosexual and engaged in orgies, even involving animals. Before selling the papacy, he had been expelled from Rome for a period. In 1044, he was declared deposed by the people, and another pope, Sylvester III, was proclaimed in his place. After a few months, Benedict returned to Rome, renewed his claim to the papacy, arguing that since he had never been officially deposed by a synod of bishops, he was still the reigning pontiff, and Sylvester was an usurper. Benedict seized the papacy by expelling Sylvester and then sold the title to the godfather, as we have seen. It is said that he sold the title to be able to marry and later regretted it, perhaps because he was denied the hand of the maiden, but it didn't end there because this man never gave up. He returned to Rome again to reclaim the papacy and have the pope to whom he had sold the title deposed. He succeeded after a couple of years, only to be deposed and excommunicated a couple of times. His absurd story would require a whole video. The pirate pope was Pope John the 23rd. Many contemporaries accused Baldassare Cossa, who later became Pope John and then an anti-pope. He was charged with incredible atrocities, portrayed as a champion of greed, sexual abuse, accused of becoming extremely wealthy through the buying and selling of ecclesiastical offices and the sale of papal indulgences. But it seems that his accusations were inflated to consider him unworthy and depose him at the Council of Constance, which he himself had convened to resolve the issue of the Western Schism. So why do I bring this up? Because I was struck by the fact that his wealth and that of his family, before becoming pope, were largely obtained through piracy and imposing tithes on maritime trade. But it seems that all this did not prevent him from becoming pope. Apparently, the irregularities in his conduct were not relevant. The Cadaver Synod is a well-known event. It is the ecclesiastical trial conducted against a deceased pope, Pope Formosus, who was exhumed to participate in his own trial, a bizarre and horrifying use that was called Synodus Horrenda. However, there are some disturbing details that you might not know. The perpetrator of this atrocity was Pope Stephen VI, who in 897 accused Pope Formosus of sacrilege and treason. In particular, Formosus was accused of ascending to the pontifical throne with the support of the pro-Germanic party, being consecrated pope while already Bishop of Porto, and violating the oath made to Pope John VIII in 878, when, to obtain the revocation of excommunication, he had pledged never to set foot in Rome again. But the real reason that drove Stephen to convene this farcical trial against Formosus was that once deemed guilty, all his acts would be null and Stephen had everything to gain from it. In fact, he had appointed Formosus as the Bishop of Anagni, and according to the ecclesiastical canons of the time, the translation of a bishop from one see to another was not possible. You couldn't be elected Bishop of Rome if you were already the Bishop of another city. Therefore, in theory, Stephen VI could not become Pope. Although exceptions had been made in the past, no one had enforced this rule, but for safety, it was better to take precautions. Rendering Formosus's acts null and void would eliminate any irregularities in Stephen's papal election. Formosus's corpse was then exhumed, dressed in pontifical vestments, and placed on a throne in the Lateran Basilica to answer all the charges. Imagine the odour in that room, but it was impossible to proceed without exhuming him. The panoramic procedure of the time required the presence of the corpus delicti during the trial, and it wasn't specified that the accused had to be alive. Thus, even corpses were admitted. Naturally, the corpse was found guilty and condemned. Since Formosus apparently didn't secure a good lawyer, the synod signed the act of deposition, declaring the Pope eternally deposition, decreed that all those he had ordained should be reordained. Formosus's vestments were torn off, and the 3 fingers of his right hand used for blessings were severed. Amid barbaric cries, the corpse was thrown out of the hall, dragged through the streets amidst the cries of the angered populace, and finally thrown into the Tiber. The corpse drifted for about 20 miles over 3 days, carried by the river's current, until it stranded near Ostia. There it was recognised by a monk, guided to the spot by a vision of the deceased pontiff. The monk hid the body until Pope Stephen VI was overthrown after a few months, and the people, expressing their outrage through a popular revolt in Rome, captured, deposed, and imprisoned him at Castel Sant'Angelo, where he was later strangled to death in October 897. Formosus's remains were handed over to a Roman pope and reburied in St. Peter's Basilica by his successor, Theodore, with a grand ceremony among the tombs of the apostles. Pope John IX annulled the Formosus trial, and all related acts were burned. Those forced to participate in the episode were pardoned as they had been compelled under threat, but those who conspired to conduct the trial on Formosus's corpse were excommunicated. The validity of all acts issued by Formosus was restored, and the instruction of trials against the dead was prohibited. I've gathered the next popes under this title because they've done it all, from visiting escorts to selling indulgences and even committing murder. It can be said that I've collected them all under one roof, which could be that of a brothel or a prison. With Stephen VI, the era of the Church's greatest decadence begins, known as the Saeculum Obscurum or pornocracy, literally the government of prostitutes. During this time, concubines and courtesans influenced the politics of the papacy. Steve and I actively participated in the Synod of the Cadaver of Formosus and came to power by deposing the anti-Pope Christopher, whom he later had killed. His contemporaries knew him as a slave to all vices. He even had a child with his underage lover Morosia, who later became Pope John XI, but there was worse to come, like John XII, an aristocrat who became Pope at just 18, probably without any ecclesiastical training. As pontiff, he behaved like a licentious prince, completely detached from the evangelical spirit. He turned the Lateran Palace into a real pleasure house, full of prostitutes, and seemed to enjoy mutilating widows, virgins, and pilgrims, advising them not to visit St. Peter's to avoid the risk of being violated by his successor. There is no doubt about the libertine conduct of Pope John XII. All contemporary and subsequent historical sources agree, including the Liber Pontificalis, an official record of the bishops of Rome at the time. Some hoped that with good examples the boy would calm down as he grew older, but instead he was accused of everything. Murder, mutilation, arson, incest, rape, simony. He was accused of toasting to the devil and gambling with pilgrims' offerings, invoking the help of pagan gods. After his death, a public inquiry revealed that he had carnal relations with his niece and more. He blinded his spiritual father, who later died, and castrated and killed his secretary. The materialistic cardinals themselves asked the King of Saxony to remove him from the Holy Roman Church due to his unworthy conduct. He was convicted of high treason and deposed from the papacy. However, John managed to regain the papacy thanks to the Roman people and sought revenge on supporters of Pope Leo VIII, his temporary replacement, by having one lose his right hand and another his nose, tongue, and 2 fingers. He died in 964 at the age of 27. Who knows what else he would have done if given more time? There are 2 versions of his death. Some say he died of a stroke, while others, including Luther, Bishop of Cremona, claim he was caught in the act with a married woman named Stefanetta, the wife of the innkeeper where he stayed. The husband allegedly threw him out of the window, but the blow was not fatal, so the Pope died after 8 days in a coma. The next Pope had a penchant for self-importance, believing that the pontiff's figure should be at the centre of attention. Thus, Boniface VIII promoted the cult of his own image, being portrayed in numerous images from frescoes to statues, something no pope had done before, bewildering many of his contemporaries. Moreover, the despotic, power-hungry ruler played a crucial role in persuading his predecessor Celestine V to retire. Once Pope, he imprisoned Celestine until his death. In addition to the usual crusades and orgies with prostitutes common to his predecessors, Boniface VIII is said to have punished friars who denigrated him by hanging them on doors by their tongue. He was also superstitious, which didn't align well with Christianity. It was said that he used knives with a peculiar handle shape, described as serpent horns. Although snakes don't have horns, regardless, they served a superstitious purpose. It's also claimed that he wore a ring that belonged to King Manfred of Sicily for the same reason. Popular legend even suggested that he personally tore it from the king's corpse. He was accused by his contemporaries of denying the immortality of the soul and authorizing priests to violate the seal of confession. You will not be surprised to find Alessandro VI, also known as Rodrigo Borgia, in this list, a dissolute and libertine man who continued to be so even after becoming pope. He had several illegitimate children, 2 of them during his papacy, often engaged in orgies, initiating wars, poisoning cardinals, and accumulating wealth for his family were among his pursuits. Alessandro not only had lovers, but also official concubines recognized by all, Bonossa Catene, and after her, Julia Farnese's. He had such an obsession with the latter that he threatened her with excommunication if she were to leave him. It seems that those seeking favours from the Pope could directly approach Giulia. One of the darkest events attributed to him is the Chestnut Banquet, an evening with 50 prostitutes who, after a dance, undressed and crawled on the floor collecting chestnuts with their mouths thrown by the guests, followed by carnal relations with them. It was rumoured that the event also had a satanic character. While Alessandro's lascivious nature was well known, some historians believe this account was exaggerated to discredit the Perugia family. I imagine that at the end of this video and in general, your opinions are divided between those who think the church should be dismantled and those who believe that despite the atrocities committed by its, let's call it personnel, including popes, the church should continue its mission without yielding to human miseries. Whatever your opinion, the important thing is to shed light, listen to different voices, reflect and develop critical thinking without closing our eyes to history. And you guys, do you conduct yourself with positive intentions in your life, or do you act more like a pope?